We'll get moving on to our next presentation. This session is going to feature a panel of educators who are going to speak on the evolution of training for supply chain automation technicians. It's going to be led by moderator Bob Symposium. And again, please remember, if you post your questions in the chat windows, be sure to select the two panelists and attendees so that everybody sees your questions. Sometimes folks can answer from the crowd. And also, this is a good one to do that on because we've got 4 presenters and they'll be watching the chat as well. So be sure to put your questions in the chat window and be sure to address them to panelists and attendees. All right, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Bob Symposium. Welcome, Bob. Welcome the panelists.
Thank you, Mary. Let me begin by introducing the other members of our panel. We've got Jeremy Banta, who's an assistant professor and program coordinator of supply chain management at Columbus State Community College in Columbus, Ohio. Jeremy is also a PI for the collaboration of Midwest Professionals for Logistics Engineering Technology Education Project. We'll be referring to that as the COMPLETE grant. With Jeremy is Chris Dennis, who's the lead supply chain management instructor, also from Columbus State, and also works on the COMPLETE grant. And then the fourth member of our panel is Dr. Ned Young, who is a professor of management and MIS at Sinclair Community College in Dayton, Ohio. Ned and I are both co-PIs on the National Center for Supply Chain Automation, and we are collaborators in the COMPLETE grant as well. We'd like to provide you with some of the history of these various projects that address technology training for supply chain technicians. In July of 2016, our original National Center PI, Kevin Fleming, who you saw narrating that video during the break, suggested that I attend a supply chain technology conference at Navy Pier in Chicago. It was the summer of the Pokemon Go phenomenon, and everybody at the conference was trying to figure out how to plant marketing tools along the Pokemon paths so that the game players could transform into paying customers. Anyhow, I visited the expo and I met staff from Columbus State, and they were promoting their logistics engineering technology curriculum. And it was a way to implement IT curriculum into supply chain, which is something that Ned Young and I were very interested in. Ned and I, along with Jeremy and Chris, submitted NSF proposals to continue that work. And how those efforts have interacted with the National Center is basically our story. We're going to ask the Columbus State people to talk first, and I believe Chris Dennis was going to begin the discussion. Chris?
Yes, thank you very much, Bob. My name is Chris Dennis, and like Bob said, I'm with Columbus State Community College. And today, Professor Banta and I will be talking about logistics engineering technology, the program, why we started the program, as well as Professor Banta will speak about the COMPLETE grant. So first, there's a lot of confusion always when you bring up the word logistics or supply chain management. So let's define the word logistics. Logistics is a part of the supply chain process that plans, implements, and controls the efficient and effective forward and reverse flow of goods and services. Really, logistics is the moving part of the supply chain. In Columbus, the reason why that's so important, and I can tell you that it's very important. We see new distribution centers coming up all the time. We have a huge distribution center park around Rickenbacker Air Force Base in Groveport, or southern part of Columbus. There's distribution centers in West Jeff, just on the west side of Columbus, a large park, as well on the right side of Columbus. There's a lot of your clothing and designer brands, Bath and Body Works, L Brands, all those, and as well as there's a Facebook center out there in Google. Columbus is growing. Why is Columbus growing? Well, it has a lot to do with the location. In Columbus, we are a 10-hour drive away from 47% of U.S. manufacturing capacity, 48% of U.S. Headquarter operations, and we're that same 10-hour drive away from about 30% of the Canadian manufacturing capacity. That's what makes Columbus and Central Ohio what makes logistics, and namely logistics engineering technology or technicians, or as called earlier, supply chain automation technicians. That's what makes them important here. Now, these are some of the companies that are in and around the Columbus area. It accounts for a large portion of our employment in this region is in supply chain and logistics. 9% of the jobs in this area are in this sector. Some of these same companies, large companies, came to Columbus State, and we invited them in to tell them, or to ask them rather, what do you need? What can the college do better for you? And they asked for the LET program. Central Ohio is home to one of the largest and fastest growing supply chain sectors. There's the 9% figure that the supply chain sector accounts for. And these are good jobs. Median career earnings between $50,000 and $70,000 per year. Really high paying jobs for people with 2-year degrees. So what we did was we partnered with over 20 of these companies, and they wanted us to prepare supply chain managers that also had not only their supply chain curriculum, but also had some engineering capabilities as well as IT capabilities. So we developed this hybrid model, and I'll go through the classes with you that the LET technicians take. But they take these classes through both in-person and online formats. There are only a few classes that are done in person, and that's because they need to be in a lab setting. We have an IST lab where our students are able to work with equipment, learn basic electrical troubleshooting. We also have a classroom that is outfitted with trainers for these students. And these trainers help the students learn how to wire circuits, also troubleshoot circuits, and also work with PLCs to understand how to program and use ladder logic. And the LET technicians all get classwork in these areas. There's also an embedded internship, not for all students in the program, but we took an existing model of, we call it the Modern Manufacturing Work Study, and it's where students will go to class and take some specific coursework in the first year to make them valuable to these 20 employers. And then in the second year of their program, they are working part-time and making a really good wage, as well as going to school part-time. And these students are able to graduate a lot of times with absolutely no debt, and a really high percentage of the time, I've heard 98%, they're offered a full-time employment after their internship. So the first year, the LET student, this is not the Modern Manufacturing Work Study model. This would be just the classes that an LET student coming in would take. It would get adjusted a little bit for the Modern Manufacturing Work Study students, but you can see in here they're getting some supply chain management coursework. They get a supply chain management principles class, as well as inventory management, but they're also in that first year getting some engineering basics in ENGT 1200. That's more about industrial engineer methodologies such as Six Sigma. They learn about just-in-time. They learn about total productive maintenance, TPM, and that. So in the second year, they'll get into more hands-on engineering training. But you can also see some IT coursework. They're getting some Excel experience in the first year, and they're getting an introduction to programming logic. In the second year, the students in the engineering part of the program, they get into much more detail with intro to electric motor controls and PLCs. This is where they're learning, they're using the trainers, and they're taking field devices and wiring the field devices up to the trainers and they're seeing how they can make things work, and they're learning ladder logic in order to put those circuits together. And finally, in the latter part of that class, they're learning how to take what they've already learned, how to actually wire the circuits, and then instead of wiring, they're using a PLC to use utilizing the ladder logic to make the circuits work. They're also taking an IT course in IT and logistics course. Still have your basic supply chain management, warehouse management here, and there's also a mix of IT courses, industrial network communications, and data acquisition systems. So we feel that this is a well-rounded program where they get equal classroom time in all three disciplines. And we have some ideas about taking the new MSSC certifications, CLT, and supply chain automation, trying to integrate that coursework into our two engineering classes so that the students also have the ability upon graduation to test for those certifications. What careers exist in this field? Well, I could tell you in Columbus, and I would imagine in most major metropolitan areas, there are a lot of openings in the supply chain. Logistics engineering technicians or supply chain automation technicians, supply chain managers, systems analysts, operations analysts. We've had graduates of this program who were actually hired as safety specialists, and we also had a graduate of the program that ended up at IT in a distribution center. So there's a lot of titles that you could get after finishing up this degree. Now, in our programs at Columbus State Community College, Professor Bantas and I, we offer these degrees and certificates. Logistics engineering technology, that's our newest degree. It's a more STEM related associate's degree, but we have international commerce, SCM certificates, as well as supply chain management and international commerce associates, supply chain management associates, and the LET degree. Next, Professor Banta will talk to you about the complete grant.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, calling me Professor Banta makes me sound old, but thank you. So before I talk about the current grant, I'm going to go back a little bit and talk about the two preceding grants just a bit, much like watching Marvel movies. It always makes more sense if you know the background. So our first grant established the LET program, and as Chris alluded, this was done through a lot of industry input and feedback. So we didn't even know it was going to be called LET until we were part of the way through the process. That grant went so well, and we were so happy with the LET curriculum that we designed. We put another proposal in and got a second NSF grant that moved that LET program into the work study model, which is where students go to school for the first year, and then during the second year are partnered with one of our partner companies where they work part-time and then go to school part-time as well. And then the third grant, which takes us even further, is the complete grant. And we hope there'll be a fourth. We have a couple ideas and some good proposals for the future on those as well. The grant's primary goal is to share what we learned in the previous two grants with others, specifically Sinclair College and Oakton Community College, but also through a network and through a lot of other venues as well. So there's 4 deliverables on the grant. The first deliverable basically is led by Columbus State and revolves around the dissemination of information from the prior grants, as well as what's going on currently. So we do this with our formal partners, as well as through continual outreach locally and nationally at events like this one. The second deliverable, and this one I'll focus on a little bit more, even though all 3 schools are doing this, it kind of revolves around a network. So it makes sense that the three schools kind of work on this together and also on their own. It revolves around creating this network. And when the grant had been proposed and the deliverable had been written, we weren't 100% sure what that network was going to look like. We wanted to kind of dig into it and see where it went. Well, through exploration, we realized schools like the Ohio State University, which is just up the road from us, have advisory boards at their college level or at the school level, like for the business college, but they didn't have advisory programs for their individual programs. Ohio State has a Master's of Business of Logistics Engineering, and the gentleman that runs that program didn't have an advisory board to get input on his program specifically. So we thought a network might be able to help replicate that while also ensuring local schools were all on the same page when it came to delivering supply chain management education. So we formed the Ohio Supply Chain Academic Network, and our primary goal is to connect the Ohio supply chain management industry with academic partners, both at the higher ed level and at the K through 12 level. You can see here some of our current partners. We not only have industry members and academic partners, but we also have what I like to call supply chain adjacent partners, like Ohio Department of Veteran Services, Battelle, Columbus Chamber of Commerce, the Regional Airport Authority, and Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. We've been in existence for 2 years, and pre-pandemic had some really good local speakers while also creating some really good partnerships. Post-pandemic, we've obviously gone to virtual and made our meetings more of working type meetings, but we're hoping to get back to the in-person. And we've also kind of branched out into hosting some events on our own as well. A K through 12 partner asked us to work with them for a virtual event connecting K through 12 students with recent college graduates to talk about different careers within logistics and supply chain management. So the third deliverable is led by Oakton. It revolves around educating faculty, and Columbus State's actually looking to replicate some of the programs that Oakton has created. And the fourth deliverable revolves around prior learning assessment. At Columbus State, we've modeled what Sinclair has done, and we continue our work in this area. So that's a quick down and dirty of what we're doing at Columbus State. If you have any questions about our program, feel free to reach out to either of us. And now I'll be followed by Ned from Sinclair. Ned?
Thank you, Jeremy. So as was mentioned, we are now in the National Center in our 10th year anniversary. So we wanted to give you a little bit of background of where we started and where we are now. So for this particular presentation, I'd like to talk to you about a few things. We're going to talk about how we started. When we began, by the way, in 2011, we were called the National Center for Supply Chain Technology Education. We did several things, created a model program, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Created a course and an e-textbook on the introduction to automated warehouse. We went through for about 5 years, and then in 2016, we reapplied with the National Center and were re-upped for 5 more years. And we rebranded ourselves then the National Center for Supply Chain Automation to kind of bring it into what we're seeing today in the supply chain. So when we began in 2011, Kevin Fleming, who you saw in the video, and he will be our keynote speaker. Many of you probably know Kevin or have heard him speak or maybe read his books and videos. Vince Donato from Jefferson Community College. He's now running the GIS Center and still a good friend of the center. Probably many of you know Vince as well. Erica Bowles out of Tacoma, Washington began with us. She has since retired. And then we still have kind of the two bad pennies here, Bob Sampolsky and myself. So this was the original model program that we developed. We call it a model program because it gives a reference to the various colleges as to what the skill sets are required. And much like Jeremy mentioned, the industry involvement and industry was really the driver of this particular model program. We had industry members from across the nation, met several times, met physically, met electronically, and developed this. And as you can see, this curriculum is very mechatronics oriented. So we have the mechanics and the electronics, hydraulics, pneumatics, kind of the core part of a supply chain automation technician. In 2016, when we reapplied, we had a little different change in the participants. Colleen Malko at the time was the PI. She has since retired, and Valerie Piper, who you met earlier, is now our PI. We were able to bring Jamie Dale in, who's become a really important member of the team. He's at Central Piedmont in North Carolina. And then there's the two bad pennies are still around, Bob and myself. So this year, we've worked, had several Zoom meetings with our industry partners across the country and talking about the new technologies, somewhat based on some of the technologies that Chris and Jeremy were talking about, the importance of having newer technologies in the model program. So this is our new model program, and we're going to jump into this a little closer. First, there were several courses that we didn't make too much of change to. So things like the general mechanics and the microprocessors, math, welding, hydraulics, pneumatics, those are really still very core foundational to the technician. But we did have to make some changes to certain courses. For example, the introduction to the automated warehouse with all the newer technologies dealing with networking and whatnot. We'll talk about those in a second. We combined our AC/DC courses together, did some changes on the OSHA. And this gives you a little bit of an idea. With the OSHA, we decided to implement the OSHA 30 so that a student that went through that course could sit then for the certification for the OSHA 30. In the PLCs, there's been a lot of work on variable frequency drives or VFDs. So we've added more information about that. We combined the AC and DC courses. They had been separate courses, but we felt like it was important to highlight the two of those together. So we did that. And then probably the biggest addition to the whole is in the introduction to automated warehousing course, where we've added networking, robotics, much of the robotics that Jason and Patty were talking about, and cybersecurity. 3 new courses: introduction to networking, the IoT cybersecurity, and the robotics. So these are 3 new courses in our model program, and we'll break these out just a little bit in more detail here for you so you can see. You'll get copies of these, but in the introduction to computer networking, we thought it's important for the supply chain technicians to understand some of the topologies that they're going to be dealing with in the network, realizing that there are probably IT specialists that are going to be setting up these networks and things, but there will be troubleshooting that's going to need to be had. So understanding a little bit about Ethernet and the standards. Wireless has become so important now with what Jason and Patty were talking about with the AMRs. All that's driven now by wireless technology. So the focus is going to be on troubleshooting and how a technician would manage that network. The next slide is an outline, just kind of give you an idea of the topics that we're talking about. But again, as the last point there makes, we're looking at troubleshooting and support for these networks. So then the next course deals with the Internet of Things. We've seen, I think the biggest change I've seen in the 10 years that I've worked with the center has been the introduction of IoT devices. Companies are finding many different types of devices, whether they be cameras or security kind of devices, or we've seen a lot of HVAC kind of devices now in cold storage areas and that sort of thing. These being implemented in the warehouses and distribution centers. And because of that, the technicians need to understand what occurs and how do these IoT devices work and how are they maintained and how do you set them up? And then, of course, when you add the IoT in there, now we're getting into issues of cybersecurity, because now you're opening your facility to the internet and issues with that. So the next slide shows you the outline that we're recommending in this particular course. Again, focusing on what the pieces and parts are and how the technician can review and perhaps troubleshoot, find issues if those should occur. And then lastly, and I think this question came up on in the chat on the last session about what should a supply chain technician understand about robots? In this module, that's where we're trying to get at is just an overview of sort of the common types of robots that are out there, whether, you know, they were mentioned AGVs versus AMRs versus fixed arm robotic systems. So there's going to be covering different types of systems, the hardware that's involved with that. How are these programmed, and what level of programming, if any, does the technician need to know? There are a lot of sensors that were mentioned on these robots. That becomes an important part for the technician to understand how these sensors work. And then lastly, this slide gives an outline of the major topics that were proposed by the industry partners for this particular module. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Bob Sempolsky, who's going to talk to us about the Introduction to Automated Warehouse course that we have with the e-textbook and changes that have been made based on the new technologies.
Yeah, thank you, Ned. Before I delve into the textbook, it probably should be pointed out that each of the 3 partner schools, Central Piedmont, Oakton, and Sinclair, had a role in each of the new classes. Sinclair took the lead on the networking, Central Piedmont took the lead in the robotics, and Oakton took the lead on the Internet of Things cybersecurity class. But getting back to the Introduction to the Automated Warehouse, during the first round of NSF funding, the center identified the need for an entry-level course that would survey the necessary skills and the equipment that technicians should have to be hired for supply chain automation positions. The discussion of the curriculum led to the plans to develop a textbook that was a collaborative development between the National Center for Supply Chain Automation and eMate. The development tool was to use Apple's iBook application, and the book is currently distributed through the iBook bookstore as well as the Google Play store. It comes in both PDF and iBook formats. There are a number of interactive crossword puzzles, exercises based upon the Jeopardy game, as well as links to various YouTube videos. Those puzzles and games we refer to as widgets. And by 2016, we produced a instructor's manual recognizing that, you know, this is something that book publishers regularly make available to faculty who adopt their books. And we wanted the book adopted, so the instructor's manual contains sample syllabi, solutions to textbook problems, supplemental activities as well. And we've even included some laboratory activities for faculty who adopt the book and have a scheduled lab component in their course activities. So this is the overview of the current textbook. Basically, the distribution of widgets and labs that we have available are displayed in the 2 right-hand columns. And as we started thinking about, you know, adding material to the book, we took some liberties to redesign things. You can see that the first 3 chapters highlighted in yellow are relatively short as compared to the other chapters. The 5th chapter, which surveys material handling equipment, is relatively long. And you know, the size of the existing chapter 5 made it difficult to place the emphasis on robotics that we felt were necessary. And clearly, you know, the Waypoint team made a point that, you know, or at least somebody in one of the questions made a point that it's no longer optional. And so when we redesigned the book, we wanted to make sure that we featured robotics in its own chapter, in addition to the networking and the cybersecurity that would occur later in the book. So our redesign of the first 3 chapters basically squeezed them into one chapter. We updated career awareness materials from the first edition. We included the new MSSC Certified Technician Supply Chain Automation certificate that Leo Reddy will be talking about later. And a big thank you to Bruce Davidson in helping us develop material for that part of the book. And we included a new widget from wisconline.com, which I believe was originally a NSF supported project that surveys supply chain management. The material for chapter 5 was large enough that we thought it could perhaps be split into 3 chapters. The first 4 sections basically survey human-driven devices and automated storage and retrieval systems. These are highlighted in yellow on the slide. The areas highlighted in blue focus on maintenance processes and computerized maintenance management software that support the maintenance process, as well as some automated inventory tools. And we reserved basically a middle chapter for new material on robotics, which we've seen from the Waypoint team how important those things are, and they are actually participating with us to draft that material. The new material is coming from, in robotics anyways, is coming from Waypoint. I was going to spend some time talking about their lab activity that they had focused on for iRobot, but both Jason and Patty ended up talking about that during their conversation. Just to remind you that the iRobot website has a software development environment that can be graphical, but it can also be textual. And by starting with the graphical construction, that code can control a virtual screen robot called a root, or you can use a Bluetooth connection and download it to a physical root bot. And by starting at the graphical level, entry-level users can proceed to fully textual code over a period of time. The predictive maintenance material that will appear in the subset of what is currently chapter 5 is being developed by Mike Grecki of Metropolitan Community College in Omaha, Nebraska. And he's working on material that will include the use of sensors and, as I said, computerized maintenance management software to aid in predictive maintenance. In this area of the book, it should be noted that we'll be using centers in areas that include applications ranging from the measurement of wear on devices that indicate a need for maintenance, the automation of inventory, as well as the ability for an autonomous vehicle to negotiate its route across a warehouse floor. So the importance of sensors can't be underestimated in this area of the text. The new chapters in the text have been submitted by Dr. John Sands. He is actually speaking on this agenda later this afternoon from Rain Valley Community College. John had submitted some lab material from the Tinkercad suite of web pages that's maintained by Autodesk. Tinkercad was created by Google engineer Kai Beckman to make 3D modeling accessible to the general public, and it supports the design of circuits and Arduino simulations. And our chapter on cybersecurity has been provided by John Romano. John is the Assistant Director of the Texas A&M Cybersecurity Center. John has provided a lab activity that features the famous Enigma cipher that was used by German intelligence during World War II. If you've ever seen the 2014 movie called The Imitation Game, the story is about how this cipher was broken by a group headed up by Alan Turing. Alan Turing is viewed as one of the founding fathers of modern computing. Basically, the Enigma worked with circular shells that had letters of the alphabet rotating around a cylinder. And John has provided a version of those shells that wrap around a cylinder of a Pringles potato chip container to demonstrate how the code encrypted. And I have to admit, I never thought in my life that I'd ever use the words Pringle and Enigma in the same sentence, but John has done that for me. So our second edition is going to play out kind of this way. Items that are not highlighted are basically replicated from the first edition. Items that are highlighted in green represent existing text in the first edition that we're going to rearrange and implement into the chapters that I've identified. And then items that are highlighted in blue represent new material that will be added to the book. And we also have some new widgets and some new laboratories that come into it. And we think that these will provide better support for those faculty who choose to adopt the text. At Oakton, we use this as a manufacturing class. We did run into one problem in the production of the original book. As I said, we were using iBooks Author. Unfortunately, Apple no longer supports iBooks Author. However, they will continue to support the iBooks Reader. And what we're going to do is we're going to use EPUB, which is an international digital publishing forum. It has some readers that are available at no charge. Actually, the majority of things on this list are readers that are available at no charge. And it also has writing tools that are available at no charge. Calibre is one of the examples of that. And the important thing of this is that after the center sunsets, if the book is going to live on, an EPUB version can be revised with open source tools such as Calibre. And then that way, as the technologies evolve, somebody can pick up and update the book at no cost. This would not be the case with either the iBook or the PDF formats. You'd have to, pay. Well, iBook won't be available because Apple won't support it. And to update the PDF format does require a license with Adobe. And the choice of using EPUB provides us the opportunity to make the book editable by users who do not have to pay a licensing fee for it. And we hope to get the second draft of the textbook available this summer. But we wanted to assure people that the instructor's manual will be updated and hopefully available by fall for those that choose to adopt. Basically, we will have new lab activities. There will be some new chapter exercises, widget solutions, and there are probably some websites that are valuable since we started that process. So I think at this point, we're ready to respond to any questions that folks have. Before we break out, I'd like to thank the panel for your work and thank you for your attention. And I'll turn it back to Mary.
Thank you to all the panelists, and thank you, Bob, for that. We do have some questions. I had a couple come in via private chat. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with a couple questions about the LET program. The first was, what led you to determine the need for the original logistics engineering technology curricula? What was the initial impetus?
I can actually answer that. It basically came from industry pointing out that there was nobody coming out of school that could speak supply chain management theory, engineering, and IT. Most of us in the supply chain industry fell into it at some point. We all know theory really well. We probably know some computers well, but I would be willing to bet that most people are like me and don't know a ton about engineering. So when you try to propose a solution to an entire group of people, being able to speak the other languages helps. And that's kind of the impetus of where the LET initial curriculum came from.
Now, is that kind of some of the core differences between the standard SCM program and LET, or can you differentiate those a little?
Yeah, so the core program is basically all theory. It can actually be done 100% online because we don't have labs. We don't have, well, we have toys. They're just really big. You can't really bring them in the classroom. It revolves around theory because we know that the normal supply chain individual is going to learn a lot on the job. So we want them to have the base theory. But with the LET part, there's some hands-on stuff they have to do. So yeah, that's where it diverges greatly, is when they start learning the programming and the electronics and stuff like that.
Okay, terrific. Anybody else want to chime in on that? Chris? No? Good enough. Okay, next question. How about the industrial members? What industry and employer, who are your partners and how did you bring them into this fold? In terms of developing LET.
Wasn't sure if Professor Banta was going to answer. At the original meeting, I wasn't there. That was before my time, but I can tell you some of the members that still are supporting the program. We have, it's not UPS, but DHL. DHL has been a part of the meeting. PepsiCo, we had members from Pepsi there. The Limited, we had members from the Limited there, the company that has Bath and Body Works, Victoria's Secrets, as well as Gap. And we have other supporting members like Abercrombie and Fitch, ODW, FST, partners like that. Jeremy may be able to add some more.
Yeah, when the initial work was being done for the LET program, at the same time, there were other grants that were establishing the Modern Manufacturing Work Study Program separate from the LET. And that actually came from Honda. Honda approached Columbus State and their factory in Marysville. They said, we stood this up and all the people we originally hired are about ready to retire and we can't backfill fast enough. And it's just not anybody you can't just hire them off the street and have them working. So we started partnering with them and then their suppliers, and then that caught on. So when the LET program came around, we had a pretty well-established base of manufacturers to tap into, as well as the already cemented logistics industry in Central Ohio.
I'll comment on the Oakton industrial partners. Back before we were part of the National Center, the state of Illinois asked all the community colleges across the state to get involved with transportation, warehousing, logistics industry. And Oakton partnered with a mid-level RFID provider and helped us put together a automated inventory component of our manufacturing area, which naturally led us into this LET environment before we even part of the National Center. As we progressed through the Complete Grant, we worked with groups like CDW and local networking companies in the Chicagoland area that were attempting to understand, what role they could play in that. And perhaps our most interesting partner is Vetter Pharmaceutical, which has a manufacturing site near one of our campuses. And they were actually looking for somebody, not so much to deal with the engineering side, but they had a robotics packaging area in one of their aseptic clean rooms. And they were looking for technicians that could help them with their packaging and help maintain the robotics that they had so that their pharmaceuticals could be shipped in an efficient manner.
So it's really a wide swath of different employers, different industries. You've got a lot of folks going on. Okay, that's interesting.
I might mention too, from the National Center standpoint, from the very beginning, we felt like it was important to have industry lead the charge. And we created a couple positions. One is an industry liaison. Steve Harrington fills that position. Many of you have probably worked with Steve in the past. And then a educational liaison, Beverly Hildebrand. Again, many of you have probably worked with her. So Steve created an extremely strong industry group. We meet with them fairly often. I think this last year and a half, we met monthly with them for the first 6 months or so. We've met with them in different locations around the country, and they really are the folks that have driven the curriculum, the model program that we saw, the introduction to automated warehousing text. In fact, many of them have written chapters in there, like Bob mentioned, for the robotics. Jason and Patty are writing the robotics chapter for that. So we feel really proud about having the industry lead the charge. They're saying to us, this is what we need out of technicians in these automated systems.
Well, that's really, where the rubber hits the road, isn't it? Just having that communication channel open between the two, it really makes a difference, which kind of leads me to my next question, which is what kind of jobs are your LET graduates finding? And are they with those same employers? I'm assuming yes, but I'll let you answer.
With those same employers, but also a lot more. I've thinking of just a few graduates right now. We have one that became a safety officer for a large transportation company, transportation and warehousing. Another graduate that actually went into the IT department of a logistics company. We now have some students placed with a couple of manufacturers just for their modern manufacturing work study. One company is a company that they make food equipment for the food industry, fast slicing equipment. They make machines and ship them all over the world. And this person will be more of a technician for them. Another one actually works for Lincoln Electric, which does a lot of distribution for different types of electrical components, and he's going to be their supply chain person. So it opens up. I always tell the students, you can do anything with this degree, from planning, being in purchasing or sales planning your production planning for manufacturing facilities, to working as a technician or a operations analyst in a distribution center, or even mid-management level with some experience in a distribution atmosphere.
Thanks, Chris. Bob, I see.
I'll mention a couple of other companies nearby. We, from the traditional mechatronics, electronics area, we were recruited to send students to, Northrop Grumman, which has a site adjacent to our district, not in our district. The community college that they were in could not provide them with the number of employees that they wanted, and so they reached out to us and we were able to help them. But again, that's more the traditional mechatronics. I mentioned the Better Pharmaceutical, and we also have had some students placed into underwriters labs, where again, it's more of a traditional mechatronics strategy on how to help the scientists at that site realize the experimentation on the devices that they're testing.
All right, we're starting to get close on time. I've got two questions left, though, that I'd like to quickly run by. One was, there was a question that came in, LET versus SCA technician. The curriculum looks close. Can you quickly sketch out the distinction, if there is one?
The SCA, we're talking about MSSC, the certification track?
SCA technician, the question
I
reads.
think the model program that we have in the National Center.
Okay. What do you want to answer that one, Ned?
Sure. Yeah, I think the model program, when we first began the supply chain technician, we were really looking at the mechatronics technician, or the industrial engineered technician. So that was the first model that I showed you. Had a lot of mechanics, electrical, hydraulics, pneumatics. Over time, with the addition of a lot of IT type devices, especially coming in with the Internet of Things devices, the cybersecurity, the networking, that's where we kind of looked at what Chris and Jeremy had been doing in the LET program, and looking at what industry was asking for sort of holistically across the nation with the National Center. And that's why we started adding these additional modules, if you will, to the supply chain technician model program. We also, in the meantime, and there'll be a whole session on this, but as many of you know, MSSC has come out with a new technician certification for the supply chain technician. Obviously, the National Center was a big part of that. MHI, Mahida, and MSSC is sort of the manager of that whole. We looked closely at that to see what they had determined from an industry standpoint were required. And that's where we started adding some of the networking and robotics and that sort of areas in there. So different colleges implement this different. Chris and Jeremy showed you how, you know, Columbus came about with this. Sinclair, we have an automation program for technicians that highlights robotics. And so different schools have kind of taken different approaches at it. But I think the important part is that these technologies are what we're seeing now in automation and in supply and logistics. And I think those are going to become the foundational, you know, skill sets that these technicians are going to need. I don't know if it's as important as how it looks at a particular college or not, but I think what we're trying to get at is what are the sort of the base skills that are going to be required of these technicians.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave a question on the table. Unfortunately, there's a question that just got posted up in the chat. If you gentlemen want to go ahead and attend to that once we get finished up here. Our time's run away from us again. I want to say thanks to all four of you, Bob, Chris, Ned, and Jeremy, for a really great and insightful presentation. Okay, so we're going to take a short break, come back at the top of the hour, 2 o'clock Eastern, and our presentation at that time will be the future of the cybersecurity workforce and how it influences what you guys are going to be doing. Very relevant topic, exciting presentation, so we'll see you back at the top of the hour. Bye, everybody, and thank you again, panelists.